All right, today we are diving into a technological leap that is so big, it honestly feels like it's been pulled straight from science fiction. I'm talking about autonomous microrobots. And we're going to unpack just how this invisible revolution is, well, it's about to change pretty much everything. You know the scene, right? We've all seen it in the movies, a tiny little ship, a submarine, navigating the human bloodstream to go zap a tumor or fix something. It's that classic sci-fi idea, tiny machines healing us from the inside. Okay, but what if I told you that fantasy is not fantasy anymore? That it's now a reality? Because in December of 2025, researchers announced a breakthrough that officially took this wild idea from the movie screen and dropped it right into the science lab. So, yeah, a sci-fi dream come true. But how? How did this happen? Let's get into the incredible tech that made it all possible. So, say hello to the autonomous microrobot. And I really want you to focus on that word autonomous. That is the absolute key here. See, this isn't some tiny puppet on a string, being controlled by magnets or lasers from the outside. No. We are talking about a device smaller than a grain of salt that can actually sense what's around it, think for itself with its own tiny brain, and then act on those decisions, all on its own. All right, the grain of salt robot. Let's take a guided tour. We're going to pop the hood and see what makes this thing tick and why it's such a massive leap forward from everything that came before it. I mean, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around how small this thing is. We're talking about 200 micrometers. To give you some perspective, that's about the size of a single-celled paramecium. It's a whole functioning machine, operating at a scale that is, yes, literally microscopic. Just wild. Okay, so this really shows you the then versus now. It's a night and day difference. Before this breakthrough, microrobots, well, they were basically puppets. You needed magnets, you needed lasers to push them around. They had zero brain power on board. But now, we're talking fully autonomous. They can sense, think, and act all by themselves. It's a complete, self-contained system with a computer built right in. A total game changer. Right, so how does it actually do it? How does a machine this tiny sense, think, and act all on its own? Let's break it down. It really boils down to this super simple but really elegant three-step process. First, it senses. It's got these incredibly precise little sensors on board that can pick up on stuff like tiny changes in temperature that you or I would never feel. Then, it thinks. It takes that information, feeds it into its little microprocessor brain, and makes a decision based on its programming. And finally, it acts. It uses this really clever system of electrodes to actually move through liquid. And get this, there are no moving parts. Nothing to break or get stuck. So let's really dig into the anatomy here. The brain? It's a microprocessor that's barely 100 micrometers across, but it's got programmable memory. And power? This is genius. It's got its own onboard solar cells. No batteries, no wires, nothing. For sensing, it can detect a temperature change of just 0.3 degrees Celsius. That's incredibly sensitive. And the movement? It's called electrokinetic propulsion. It's just a brilliant way to swim through fluids without any little legs or propellers to worry about. Okay, so the tech is amazing. Mind-blowing, really. But what's the point? Why should we care? Well, this is where it gets really exciting. We're talking about healing from the inside out, a whole new era of medicine. Just let your imagination run wild for a second. Think about sending in an army of these tiny bots to hunt down cancer cells and deliver drugs only to the tumor, leaving all the healthy cells completely alone. Or imagine them repairing damaged nerves cell by cell. They could be like little guards inside our bodies, constantly on patrol, looking for the very first signs of disease. We're even talking about them doing complex microsurgeries, maybe helping out a surgeon, or maybe one day even doing certain delicate jobs all on their own. And listen, this isn't some fantasy for the year 2100. Researchers are actually predicting we could see these things being used in medicine within 10 years. 10 years! The biggest thing they need to crack right now is biocompatibility. Basically, they have to make sure these little guys can swim around safely inside of us, in the salty, complex environment of our blood. But it's not just about medicine, not by a long shot. Imagine swarms of these robots silently patrolling our water systems, sniffing out pollutants with pinpoint accuracy. Or how about in factories? Picture them building things from the atom up, creating brand new materials we can't even conceive of yet. The possibilities are huge. And here's maybe the most shocking part of all of this, the cost. Because they make these things the same way they make computer chips, they can print them out in these massive batches. And the result? Each one of these little autonomous robots costs just pennies to make. Pennies. This means it's not some super expensive tech just for the rich. This is something that could be used everywhere, by everyone. Okay, so the future looks amazing, but we're not quite there yet. What's next for these microbots? Let's talk about the road ahead and some of the bumps in it. Yeah, there are still some pretty big hurdles to clear. We already talked about biocompatibility, making them safe for the body, but then there's power, right? How does a solar-powered robot work when it's dark inside your body? Good question. And how do they navigate through all the stuff in our biological systems? And here's a big one. How do you get 1 million of them to work together as a team? On top of all that, of course, are the huge ethical questions. We have to make sure we roll this out safely and responsibly. You know, a breakthrough like this doesn't just appear out of thin air. It's been a long time coming. The basic idea was floated way back in the 80s. It wasn't until around 2020 that they could even make a computer small enough. That led to some early walking prototypes a couple of years later. And all of that work, all those decades of research, finally led to this moment in 2025, the first fully autonomous microrobot. It just goes to show you what long-term vision can do. So there you have it. The line between science fiction and science fact, it's pretty much been erased. These tiny, thinking, acting robots, they aren't a what if anymore. They're here. So the only real question left for us to think about is, how are they going to reshape our world from the inside out?